Hi guys, welcome back to part two of the water feature that we've been working on here in the Terrain Studio. So we basically prepped everything up. We have a little bit of our landscape done now. Now it's dry, nice and crispy. We've done the sculpt mold here, kind of our water base. We've got a little bit of the texture paste here, some rock elements, and we talked about doing this as a fall scene, and I'm going to kind of fall this up in the subsequent videos. But what we are going to focus on in this first part of this video series here is we're going to prep the water for the resin pour. And for that, we're going to use a couple materials. Obviously, we're going to use a pair of scissors. And we are going to use a couple different tapes to prep this. So what I have here is just a really thin lining tape. And this one's about the thickness of the actual plinth base here. And I want to have a strip put down here because what I really want to do is I want to make sure that when I do pour the resin, I don't get it onto the wood. I want to kind of keep that uniform throughout the whole piece on the backside and the front as well. Then we're going to come in with some of the Tamiya masking tape here. This stuff's really nice to press in. It's really, really thin. We're going to put that around. That's going to be kind of our depth gauge. And then we're going to just come back with a little bit of painter's tape, the 3M blue stuff, just as a little bit of a strengthening agent. And we're going to do a couple strips of that. And that's just going to provide some rigidity to this. So it's fairly straightforward. What we're going to do is we're going to take some of this lining tape here. I'm just going to stretch out a piece. There we are, and cut it. We don't need this to go all the way around, but what we do want to do is make sure that we are masking off at least the water area. So I'm going to go a little bit past where I want this to start. And I'm going to go and stretch this right out and kind of bring it as close as I can, giving it lots of pressure on the press. And I want to bring this, and I'm kind of stretching it right along the water line. There we go. And again, giving that a really, really strong press. You want to be as tight to the plinth as possible. And then I'll just push this excess right around. This I'm not as worried about on the backside, just something to get it nice and flat. But again, just coming back, can't stress enough how much you want to make sure that you press this straight in to your base. Like, you should not be really able to see that. And that's going to give us, I'm hoping, a nice little seal along there. Now, when I put this on, in theory, I want to stay just below the sculpt mold because I'm not trying to have any bubbles in that. I want to be right along the wood. So that's layer one. Then what we're going to do is we're going to come in with some of the Tamiya lining tape. This has a little dispenser, so these are great dispensers, by the way. You can buy them like this, or you can buy the replacement rolls. I bought these at one point, and then I just buy the replacement rolls from now on. So I have like 4 or 5 dispensers. So now what we're going to do, again, coming back and just going a little bit further than the first layer. And if you can see right on here, you can see that this stuff's nice and thin. So you'll be able to tell, like, for example, if I just laid that on there, I know that that's not, it's not strongly adhering. I can tell there's bubbles in there. And then the more I rub that, the more I can actually rub those bubbles straight out. So for this, what I want to do is the opposite. I'm actually going to switch it around here. I want to come right along the bottom of the wood layer here. So now I'm trying to be as uniform, I didn't want to do that, as uniform to the bottom of the plinth as possible. And again, pulling this really, really taut, but not too tight because I don't want to tear it, to leave this intact. So again, just getting that as tightly to the bottom as possible. This is going to create a little bit of a back bevel on our tape here. It's gonna, because I'm pulling it in, it's going to want to pull right into the inside. And what I mean by that is it's going to be angled this way. Now that's not going to be too big of a problem because, one, it's a sample piece, and two, I'd be okay with a beveled edge in the water this way. But depending on if you're trying to create this along a ridge or joining up 2 pieces, you may not want to have a back bevel. The problem with this is that it's not really a problem. The reason for that is it's actually following the shape of the Sculptamold, and I actually angled the Sculptamold in this way. So if I was doing this along like a board edge, when I poured my Sculptamold, I would have shaped it already and really squared it up. Here I do have a bevel, and so I'm just going to work with that and let the tape kind of create that shaping. Again, I'm going along this ridge and really trying to press this in as hard as I can. This is going to, it is going to leave a little bit of a Sculptamold on the exposed edge here. That's probably not going to end up with resin, but again, we're just trying to go for the squared edge here, and then work on our water effects. So once I have that pressed in, you could do a second layer of this. In fact, I probably will do that just to kind of show you that this is something that you might want to consider doing. The second layer doesn't really do a lot in terms of create the seal, because you've effectively done that with your first layer. So what you are doing with this layer is you're just adding a little bit of rigidity, I should stay on camera here, to your first one. And again, you'll see here that you got this little pocket between those two. Just go ahead and squeeze those two layers together. You want to be kind of careful that you don't put too many wrinkles in it, air pockets, etc. There. And that's probably strong enough, to be honest. You probably, like, the resin's going to work against it a little bit, but it's not like it's going to like burst the dam kind of thing. You're not pouring a significant amount on here. But let's just say that you were, or on your particular water feature, you have a thick depth pour, or you're a little bit worried, or maybe perhaps it's even angled a little bit more, where you are going to have a little backflow of your resin. That's where, if you grab this other tape, you can just come in with this again, just keeping it slightly off the bottom of the plinth, just to not have the piece sit uneven when the resin is curing. Working this along the edge. And on the back side, it doesn't really matter. Again, just popping it there. Same sort of deal here. I'm going to go along and press my two layers of tape together. It's not going to do much backing if they're not actually adhered to each other. There, and then I want to give another really strong press of that tape. Okay. So now we've effectively set up our tape dam. I have done this before, where I've done it with Plasticard and gone in and set, like, weld bond along the edge. And you know what? Honestly, I just found that ended up being a lot more work, and didn't do any different for the result, any difference. If I'm pouring a rather large piece, like the Kashyyyk project, for example, had like a 3-foot water edge. In that particular case, I feel like the Plasticard was better, because I was able to kind of adhere a strong piece to a really straight edge. That wouldn't really work here. I'd be trying to get Plasticard to fit a very curved edge, and in fact, it's curved and beveled, and that really wouldn't have been any quicker than this. In fact, it would have taken significantly longer, and then I would have had to worry, about cure times and setup times and all that great stuff. So there we have the tape dam. We're all kind of set up. The only thing that you'll want to pay attention to, and the reason that I chose to use the yellow in this particular thickness, I could have went thicker, is this actually gives me a depth gauge. So when you do pour your resin, you may find it's like rather difficult to kind of determine how deep it is, because you can't really measure. But I have found that this little trick here actually serves as a depth gauge. So I'm using the yellow tape as my kind of resin indicator. So, I'm going to pour it up to it, and I think that'll kind of get me close on this particular side here. It may be a little bit high. So I'm just going to kind of let that flow in. I also have a water line that helps me too, but the water line works on this side and it doesn't necessarily work over here. So again, if you want to use your tape or kind of put it up to the edge that you want, back it with something else so you have a little bit of a contrast line, then you can use that as your depth for your resin. Or if you're doing it at a 2-part pour, this is up to this height for pour one, and past that for kind of height two. So just a nice way to do that, and you can peel that off without really much effect later on. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set this aside. So I can go prep the resin. One of the things that you want to do before that resin, I'll talk about it now though, is really make sure that this is super clean surface. Make sure you don't have any flocking kind of sticking to any parts that you don't want to. We are actually going to end up adding a bunch of bits in here, so I'm not actually overly concerned with keeping our pour two clean, and we're actually going to tint the water, so that's actually going to help us hide anything on the bottom as well. But all the same, if this is your project, you may not have any of the luxuries of that, and or there may be other reasons that you want to keep it particularly clean. So just some of the prep work that you want to do. So I'm going to go set this aside. I'm going to grab the resin, pour it out, and then we'll get going with the pour, and then we'll come back after that to see what the results look like. Stay tuned. All right, guys, so we're back. I have the resin just poured off camera here, and I'm just using this Michaels two-part resin. I want to talk really briefly about this, and I'm going to have to go rather quickly because I've already decanted it. But you'll notice that this one actually has a yellow tinge to it. This is another hardener of another resin that I have, and you'll notice that it is much more translucent. One of the things you have to be careful about, specifically the hardener, that if it does get oxidized, and I had this as a sample, so I was doing all my testing out of this particular one, so it was open a lot more than I would typically have used. And I did this before for another project, and then I let this sit. But what I actually noticed about this, and I wasn't really aware of this, because I couldn't remember that they weren't actually two different colors when I initially bought this. But what it ends up doing, and for this particular project, this particular type of application we're going to do, it's not actually going to impact it. However, if you're looking for a crystal clear resin, which I was on the Hobbit project, you are going to have to pay very close attention. I haven't noticed that it has any issues at all with the hardening properties. It just has a slight discoloration to that. So what I've actually done in some other test samples, and I had these for you guys for particularly this, is I poured these out just to show you the different color variations. And this one right here is actually what I would call the clear one. And it does have a slight yellow tinge to it. You can see this is kind of pure white. So there is a little bit of a yellow tinge to it. And that's what this would come out looking from a clear standpoint. So you can see that it's still not too bad, and it certainly has a good water feel. This one has a little bit of a tint added to it, and then this one has a little bit more, and in fact, I do have another one that has even more tint added to it. So we're going to go for something kind of in this realm for this particular project, but I wanted to show you what the tint actually does to it. But because we're tinting green, the little bit of yellowing or off clear color isn't going to have any significant impact. You can see kind of how crisp those come out when they are poured. So another thing we're also going to do, and you can see in these particular ones here, is we have this duckweed. Now, if I look on the bottom, you can see that I have some of the duckweed or small leaf scatter. It has actually found its way to the bottom. That's purposeful. And then on the top, you're going to see that we have some of it that's just below the surface and just at the surface, and that's purposeful as well. That's actually going to be something I'm going to show you how to do if you want to achieve some depth in a rather shallow pour, because as you can see, you can get a little bit of depth here. We're going to achieve this by two things. One, by application time, significant timing within our drying process, and then also coloration of what we put down. So as I said, I decanted out 2 containers, equal size. You can weigh these and or eyeball. If you have perfect eyes like me, you can level them out. Just kidding. But I actually just use the eye level method. You can also put marks on there. That's a really clever way of doing it. And then you can kind of ensure that you don't have to rely on your eyes, but actually physical measurements. But a lot of people will weigh it out. I don't weigh it if you're going to be talking about this small amount. But if you are particularly keen on making sure that you have exactly the 1-to-1 ratio, and I do myself a favor, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. It's really easy. I just go ahead and eyeball it out. So that's what I've done here. Again, keep in mind that this should be clearer than it is. So you're going to need a larger cup as well. You can pour them in. I'm going to just go ahead and pour it. There's probably a scientific way. I actually don't usually care about which order I put them in. But again, when you put them in, you're going to have the clock's basically started. So I'm going to work this in live time for you. You are supposed to stir this for 5 minutes or so. You want to get as many bubbles gone as you can. So I'm going to put them in, and then I'm going to do the stirring process off camera, so I'm gonna hit the stop button and we'll come back when it actually is mixed. But you do want to mix for about 3 to 5 minutes, erring on the side of more is better. In this particular case, you are trying to stir out the bubbles, or as many bubbles as you can. I'm also going to show you another clever technique to take care of the bubble scenario. And I'll try not to bump the tripod anymore as I work really close to the camera. So that is in there. And next up, we're going to go in with the hardener. And then the time really does start. So I just use this spatula. It's nice because it cleans up as well, so I don't have to throw it out, but you can use something. Again, all the safety things, I can't do this when I'm working with the camera, but you should probably wear a mask and be in a well-ventilated area. Ventilation I have covered. Mask I do not, for the purposes of trying to do this on camera for you. And best to wear gloves. I am not, because it's hard to work the camera with gloves as well, but I'm being very careful. Because this is an irritant both for eyes and skin. So I'm going to now go be safer off camera. I'm going to stir this up. We're going to come back when it's prepped, and then we're going to do the pour process. Be right back. All right, guys, so we are now back. I've given this a thorough stir, and you're going to see that I've created significant agitation in here. I've also, while mixing it, I should have mentioned before, but I am using some sage green water tint. This is a Woodland Scenics product. So this is, let's read it kind of here, specifically formulated for authentic watercolors, modeled transparent to opaque water, used to customize water system products. So this stuff goes a long way, just letting you know. This was 2 drops to get it to this sort of green color. I could go a bit more, but in fact, I do want to kind of establish a fairly nice gradient in this, and I do want to show you how the striations work when you apply the water plants in different timing orders. So I chose to go a little bit lighter, but certainly I could have went darker, and you can get it right down to a real deep green. So if you're going for something like, let's say you want to do a sludge pond, some sort of toxic waste type environment, this added to higher volumes would certainly achieve that effect. If you want just a very, very slight tint, use as recommended for the adjusted amounts. So again, a little goes a long way in this particular case. So I am ready to do the pour. Good idea to just give your sort of plinth here another little press. Make sure you got as tight as you can. And I mean, if you have a little bit of leak, that's fine. A great idea, and I probably should do that right now. Is just throw a little something underneath it to kind of make sure that you don't have any leaking occurring. I'm going to leave this right here, so I'm going to go ahead and grab myself a white piece of paper. You also notice that I stuck a little resin cast branch down here. I thought, you know what, let's add a little feature into the water so we can have a little something to work around there. So we're all mixed up, and we're going to go ahead and do the pour. And then I also have a tool just off camera here. I have my Woodland Scenics heat gun. This is fantastic, by the way. I bought this like 100 years ago. Never really found a great use for it until I started working with resin. It is the magic button when it comes to taking out bubbles. I'll do that on camera. It'll be a little loud, so I'll probably mute the volume, but I'll kind of talk about what it specifically does for this. So I am going to be in the way here, but we're going to go ahead and do the pour. Try to stay away from the flocking on the shoreline here, so I'm just going to let that sort of level out. Because we're getting pretty close over here, and if it does touch it, it will wick up into the shore. That's perfectly fine. Like I said, that's something to be expected, especially if you are pouring resin close to flocking. It just creates a bit of a wet look, but that's not unlike nature to have some wet soil in and around your shoreline. So I actually think I like that with a little bit of exposed dirt there. It is going to probably wick a little bit right there, and that's going to get right up into that log, which I think is actually a super nice place for it to actually create that effect. Maybe a little bit in the corner right there. But other than that, I can see, I'm just going to slightly move this. Doesn't look like we have any immediate leaks, which is great. And if you do, it's going to probably seal off right away at the bottom anyway. This stuff stays pretty viscous. So now you can kind of see that we've poured this down. but we still have a ton of bubbles, and it's obviously not very transparent. So I'm going to grab my tool, my heat gun. It's not temperature controlled, so you're going to have to control the sort of flow by height, and by sort of the amount, the speed at which you kind of pass over. So you'll kind of see the motions. I'll actually pass in front of the camera, maybe like this, just so you can kind of get a sense of how far and how fast I'm moving. I'll do it in real time, but I will mute the volume. So here we go. So just coming in here for a minute, you can see here as I've moved it back and forth, I am washing it up actually into the flocking. So that's actually perfectly fine, because I am going to get that really uniform bleed into the edge. And that's actually something I achieved on the Hobbit project as well. And that's the reason that you want to leave that little transitional gradient, is because you want to kind of have a bit of buffer room. So whatever kind of comes up doesn't keep pulling up the resin. So I'm just sort of splashing it up there. And you can see that I've really significantly thinned this out. The bubbles will actually naturally work their way to the surface. You can breathe over this with a kind of a hot breath as well. A hairdryer also works. This just happens to be slightly more intense heat and a little bit more focused than a hairdryer. So I'm going to come back in, do a little bit more. All right, so we got that really nice wetting effect happening through here, which is really nice. It won't bleed your whole surface. It will just kind of, the only problem is it's a little harder to control, so you will have to kind of live with a little bit as it goes up there, and it will start to dry. Once it starts to dry, and it will be certainly thinner than the rest of your resin, it actually will create a natural dam and not allow any more to go up. We're going to do two things at this point. We haven't quite worked out all our bubbles, and we kind of let this process happen. They will keep percolating to the surface, but what I do want to come in to do now is I do want to add a little bit of the duckweed. So let's come in with that, and with that material, we want to kind of focus it and concentrate it in and around the shoreline, as well as in and around this this tree branch. So for this, I'm just going to use a little bit of the darkened green. So this is the super leaf material. I think it's in the Flock and Turf line. I will put a product image next to it. So if I have that wrong, just look at the image. That'll be correct. And again, you want to use that sprinkle technique, that 2-finger sprinkle technique, and you want to make sure that you're concentrating it again in and around the shoreline specifically. And I'm going to actually creep it out around this tree, because I think that'll look interesting. And just sprinkle that right through. My hand's probably completely in the way, but you'll see when I back my hand out here. It's a little tricky for me to do it without getting my hand in the way. So again, just concentrating that in and around shoreline. If I get a little bit up onto it, that's fine. That just would create a natural look as it kind of gets blown in. So I went a little bit heavy with that, which is perfectly fine. And you're going to notice that that's immediately going to start to disappear in this resin. So there's a method to this madness. The darkest stuff and the earliest applied stuff is what I want to have settle out near the bottom. This is the stuff that's the most saturated, closest to the shoreline, having kind of been tamped down. So I'm actually going to put a bit of this on right now. I'm also going to put a bit of this on in about 10 minutes from now. And that's actually going to be the same color. And then later, in about 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, I'm actually going to come back in with a slightly lighter layer. And I'm actually going to do that near the surface too. It's the same material effectively. It's just a little bit closer to the surface, a bit more sun, a bit more bright. So I'm trying to sell the look that these two materials are actually the same, but at depth differences and not necessarily different leaf products. So again, I'm going to come back in right now, mute myself again, and blow out the last of these bubbles. Got a few more to sort of blow out, but I'm not going to be overly concerned with those, because as this actually dries out, they'll actually add a little bit of a cool effect to it. So I'm going to let a few more percolate to the top. We're going to go ahead and leave this a little bit. You'll notice that you'll get a little bit of wicking around any of the water features that you've put in as well. So kind of along this log, it's going to have this natural sort of wicking where it kind of comes up underneath your log here, that's actually going to be pretty natural for anything that you put in. One of the things you can do is you can tease a little bit along the edge and just sort of pull some of that resin down. But again, not going to be overly concerned with that. You'll also notice with the heat gun and blowing in, or blowing around the resin rather, I definitely pushed down that first layer of duckweed. And I was also trying to focus in on keeping it congregated into the shoreline, which now you can see that's really settled out along that base layer, which is great. That's exactly what I wanted to do with that. So again, I'm gonna go back and forth with the heat gun. I'm gonna do this off camera and just working these bubbles out. I will come back and show you the next application of the light green. I won't show you the second application of the dark green, but again, like I said, give yourself about 10 or 15 minutes. You don't want this to fully set up, and it certainly won't in that time, but you want to make sure that it gets a little bit heavier on the viscosity, and so that stuff sinks even slower. And again, I'm not going to be using the heat gun at that point, so I'm not going to be blowing that down prematurely. I'm not going to end up having that get forcefully pushed to the bottom of this particular build. So a little bit of off-camera work. Like I said, it's only going to be short clips. And just to recap again, I'm going to work the bubbles out a bit more, apply the dark green a second time, and then I'll show you the final application of the light green in about 20 or 25 minutes from now. And then we're going to leave this set the full 24 hours. We'll come off, peel the blue tack, sort of the blue tape away, the yellow tape away, and then we'll get really looking at this project to how to convert it to a fall scene. I didn't fully convert it over to a fall at this point because I just wanted to give you the versatility of having it go whatever direction you want. This certainly doesn't have to be fall. In fact, I could probably make this look a nice, summer, even spring scene. I could certainly turn this into a winterized scene, although I probably would have approached the base work a little bit different. But we're going to go for the fall look because one of the other things that we're going to want to do, and I should have also mentioned, and I will show you in that final application, is we need some leaves sprinkled in here. So let's get focused a little bit on getting the leaves in, particularly in the water, but then we're going to have to tie in the land-based leaves as well. So stay tuned, guys. We'll come back for another couple clips, and then the part 3 effectively will be when we sort of fall up this particular plinth. So stay tuned.